As the 2024 presidential election approaches, voters are keenly focused on the key issues that will define the race between former President Donald Trump and incumbent President Joe Biden. A recent survey conducted by Fox News highlights the top concerns among Americans, ranging from the economy and healthcare to immigration and national security. These issues are expected to play a crucial role in the upcoming debates and ultimately influence voter decisions. Joining us now to shed light on these findings and what they mean for the election is Dustin Olson, a pollster with American Pulse Research and Polling, as well as the host of the Political Trade Secret podcast. Hi, Dustin. Thanks so much for your time today.
It's great to be here, Veronica.
So President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump will face each other in the first presidential debate of this election cycle. What can voters expect?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. I've been looking forward to this debate because a lot of us never thought it was actually going to happen after what happened in 2020. And it's no secret that these two fellows don't care for each other too much, and that there's a divide in the country. But it was interesting. Over a few months, Donald Trump campaigned with signs at his rallies saying anywhere, any place, anytime that he would debate Joe Biden. Joe Biden took him up on it, and the any place was CNN, which is not necessarily the best venue for Donald Trump, but I think he had to make good on that. And it's interesting, they've done this outside of the Presidential Debate Commission, which both sides have had complaints about over the last few years. And it seems like it was a little bit of a thing from a bygone era. So they worked out all the details themselves and with CNN, and it promises to be quite a bit different than previous debates. In many ways, this is more like a candidate forum based on the new rules that they agreed to, where it's going to be more of an interaction between the candidates and the moderators than between the candidates. With they're going to have their mics turned off in between, and that they're only going to be allowed this certain amount of time, and so many different things like that. Also, they're going to have 2 commercial breaks, which is unusual for a debate like this, but it's time for them to refresh, I guess, in the middle of it, since we have a little bit older candidates this time. And one thing that I think is very interesting, and I think I have an idea why the Biden team insisted on it, is that they have no props. And it's interesting, if you've been watching any of the campaign trail footage, Donald Trump has a little package of Tic Tacs that he takes around with him that represents shrinkflation. It's amazing. You pay the same amount, but it's like 5 Tic Tacs in it. And I think they were worried that he might have something like that to show during the debate to point out that the inflation and shrinkflation have been so large under this president, which goes to the top issues, which we'll talk about in a second.
So, as you mentioned, what are the top concerns of voters this presidential election cycle?
It's very clear in our polling, as well as in the polling that we track with other media organizations and pollsters out there, that the top issues affecting Americans are inflation and the cost of things, grocery store, gas, all of those. When we do polling, we actually usually will ask what we call as open-ended questions. And we get a verbatim response, like exactly what the voter told us. And we ask them oftentimes, what are you dealing with? What's important issue to you? And people will be very specific. They'll say groceries. They'll say the cost of gas. They'll say my mortgage. It'll say credit card debt. There's a lot of things that are tied to interest rates and inflation that come up in those responses. And you see other polling where 90% of people say that this is a concern to them. Some people, a very big concern is around 60%. And other issues are important to people, but they don't have the same day-to-day impact on them. But other issues that are always big is immigration and the border, as well as something that's become a bit more of an issue is Israel, and more people are concerned about that. But really, it's those 2 big ones, inflation and immigration. And interestingly, the worst disapproval numbers for Joe Biden are on those issues. The absolute worst for him is on immigration. It's about 62% disapprove of his handling. Then on the economy, it's the average of polls is about 60% disapprove of his handling of that. And which is something that's actually very interesting to me, is that Israel and Hamas conflict has also become one of the largest disapprovals for Joe Biden, as well as Ukraine. So there's a lot of things that have become issues for him. The biggest issues tend to be better for Republicans, and not just any Republican, but in particular Donald Trump, because unlike other people running, this is the first time we've ever had two one-term presidents running against each other, and they both have a track record. And generally, whether people like the candidates or not, and it's interesting, about the same number of people dislike both of them, which is why we see such a close race. But when it comes down to policy, people just think that Donald Trump has handled those key issues better than Joe Biden has, and that's why we see a race that, even after the convictions in the Manhattan trial, we see a stable lead for Donald Trump nationally, or tied nationally. And then what's interesting is in the swing state polling, which is unusual for this election cycle. Previously, a lot of pollsters doing media polls did not do a lot of swing state polling. I think it's really great that people are doing more swing state polling, doing polls in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, places like that, because that's really what's going to determine this election. And the average of the swing states is about 3.2%, and has been pretty consistent for months that Donald Trump has that within those swing states. But that's actually going to have to change soon, because the swing states are actually starting to change. We've started to have Minnesota and Virginia, which nobody really thought this election cycle would start to be competitive. But in Virginia, I think we're seeing that Biden is up by only about 2 to 3%, and same thing in Minnesota.
Really interesting. And as you mentioned, it always comes down to those numbers. We'd love to have you back on just to kind of hear what voters had to say following the first debate.
Yep, absolutely. It's great to be here.